Joining me now from our bureau in Washington, D.C., former chief counsel to Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist, former deputy counsel for the Republican National Committee, and CEO at the Vogel Group, Alex Vogel. Alex, okay, so they've gone from quid pro quo. They're not talking about the Democrats anymore. They're talking about bribery and extortion. And you can figure out why they're using the term bribery, because it happens to exist under the impeachment clause in the United States Constitution. So suddenly they're quoting the Constitution here and using the term bribery. As far as extortion is concerned, this to me is best defense is a good offense, right? Because this is exactly what their guy, Joe Biden, is guilty of.
Well, not only do you have the former vice president on tape bragging about that activity, that I agree is more rightly called extortion than anything you see here. They're trying to do this for a couple of reasons. The other thing that's really troubling is they are now making arguments that efforts by this president to defend himself as part of this process are in and of themselves obstruction and potential articles for impeachment. Now, whether you were in a legal proceeding or whether you were in a political proceeding like this, the reality is you have the right under our Constitution to avail yourself of your constitutional protections. In the case of the president, that includes, among other things, executive privilege. So when he says, I don't want to turn over documents, I don't believe I have to, or allow someone to testify, they are now attempting to use that as in and of itself an impeachable event, in addition to this ludicrous and tortured explanation of extortion. As someone rightly pointed out, if that's extortion, then we are currently extorting North Korea and Iran, as any president who tries to use his authority to get countries to do things that we want is, under their definition, committing extortion. It's preposterous, and it won't stand.
To your point, they're also trying to prove obstruction. And they have a question now. It's kind of a rhetorical question that they're ostensibly using as a guideline. So here it is. Did the president and his administration seek to obstruct, suppress, or cover up information to conceal from the Congress and the American people evidence about the president's actions and conduct? A broader picture of what you're talking about to me is this goes to the separation of powers. The Article 1 branch of government cannot dictate to the Article 2 branch subpoenas for people or documents. This is a violation of what the framers of the Constitution set up. It's called separation of powers. And to make it clear, reverse the bet, right, Alex? Imagine if President Trump went on Twitter and said, we demand the phone records of Adam Schiff from, say, July, August 2019, right around the time the whistleblower testimony and report was being shaped. We'd like to have those records, right? It's a fair comparison.
It is a fair comparison. And look, that separation of powers built into our system is one of the reasons that courts have generally viewed as political questions disputes like this between branches of government. I would not be at all surprised as these matters wind their way through the process to see some of these fights wind their way through the courts, ultimately to the Supreme Court, which I believe will either uphold the president's authority under things like executive privilege and or decline to involve itself in this process, rendering it a political question, and one that those, especially on the House side, who vote for these matters will ultimately be held to account for by the voters.
Well, you know, I don't even think the courts have a role in this. The courts ought to just kick it back and say this is a constitutional matter. We have no role here. We're the third branch of government. This involves Article 2 and Article 3. But let's go to the Republican defense strategy here, if you want to call it that. It's a little bit chaotic. Okay, so they're going to argue no quid pro quo, but we already know the Democrats aren't arguing that anymore. No pressure during the phone call. Okay, that's pretty obvious. Ukraine interfered in the 2000 presidential election. Yes, they did. They attempted to, as did other countries. And the president has reasonable skepticism of Ukraine and giving them U.S. taxpayer aid. And to your point, you would have to posthumously impeach probably all 44 previous presidents for telling rogue countries that we're about to give money to that, hey, you better clean up your act or you won't get the money.
You're right, and I think one of the things that's going to come out as this defense develops is the idea that Vice President Biden's conduct as a political candidate is not in question. It's his behavior
Right.
when he was the sitting vice president. So this idea that the president was somehow using a foreign power to investigate a political rival, let's take it a different way. The current president was asking the foreign player, because frankly, they're the only ones with these answers, what exactly the former vice president appears to be doing on that videotape when he was sitting vice president, and appeared to be meddling in the business affairs of his son in the middle of a corrupt administration overseas.
Right.
So when you take it in the context of, this is not about Mr. Biden's role as a political rival, it's about what he did when he was vice president. And while there may be some protections accorded, although not in the Constitution the way they are arguing them, while it may be inappropriate to use someone's status as a political rival to go after them, the reality is there is absolutely nothing that anyone can argue that's inappropriate about investigating whether or not a sitting vice president engaged in corrupt behavior with his son involving a foreign country. And I think you're going to hear more about those issues.
Again, flip the bet, right? If Joe Biden were not running for president of the United States, then what would be the Democrats' argument on this one? Alex, thank you.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One America News on YouTube, and call your cable provider and kindly demand that One America News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.